The night I spilled coffee on a billionaire suit, everyone thought I was about to lose my job. Nobody imagined it was the beginning of a story that would leave an entire city speechless. I still remember the sound of rain tapping against the tall windows of Sinclair Manor. Soft. Steady. Expensive somehow. Even the rain sounded different in places like that. I was 24 years old, working 3 jobs, and trying to keep my younger brother alive long enough to get the heart surgery he needed. Every dollar mattered. Every shift mattered. Every mistake mattered. That was why my hands were trembling as I balanced a silver tray loaded with fresh coffee cups across the marble floor of one of the largest private homes in New York. Sinclair Manor wasn't really a house. It was more like a luxury hotel pretending to be someone's residence. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings so high they disappeared into shadows. Paintings worth millions decorated the walls. Fresh white roses filled every corner. Everything looked perfect. Untouchable. And I felt completely out of place. "Grace," my supervisor whispered sharply as she passed me. "Mr. Sinclair is arriving any minute. Be careful." As if I needed the reminder. Everyone in America knew who Ethan Sinclair was. Billionaire entrepreneur. Media favorite. The man whose companies seemed to appear everywhere. Phones. Hotels. Real estate. Technology. If something carried the Sinclair name, people paid attention. I'd seen his face on magazine covers while standing in grocery store checkout lines. He looked confident in every photo. Calm. Controlled. Untouchable. The kind of man who lived in a completely different universe from someone like me. I adjusted my grip on the tray and kept moving. My black Maid uniform felt stiff against my skin. The shoes I'd bought on clearance 6 months ago pinched my feet with every step. I told myself to focus. Just finish the shift. Go home. Check on Ben. Start again tomorrow. Then the front doors opened. The atmosphere changed immediately. Conversation stopped. Staff members straightened. Security guards shifted positions. I didn't even need to look up to know Ethan Sinclair had arrived. But I did anyway. And for a moment, I forgot to breathe. He was taller than I expected. Maybe 6'3". Dark hair. Navy suit tailored so perfectly it looked like it belonged in a movie. He moved through the foyer with quiet confidence, acknowledging greetings without slowing down. There was no arrogance in his expression. No dramatic display of wealth. Somehow that made him even more intimidating. People didn't follow him because he demanded attention. They followed him because attention seemed to follow him naturally. I lowered my eyes and continued walking. Employees weren't supposed to stare. My focus returned to the tray. One step. Then another. Then another. Everything would have been fine if someone hadn't suddenly backed into my path. The collision was small. Barely noticeable. But it was enough. The tray tilted. My stomach dropped. Time slowed. I watched a cup slide across the polished silver surface. Watched dark coffee spill over the rim. Watched it arc through the air. And land directly on the front of Ethan Sinclair's immaculate suit. The entire room fell silent. My heart stopped. The cup shattered against the marble floor. Coffee spread across fabric that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I stared at the stain, already imagining the termination paperwork waiting for me by morning. Then I forced myself to look up. Ethan Sinclair was staring directly at me. Not at the ruined suit. Not at the broken cup. At me. And something about the expression in his eyes made my pulse race for an entirely different reason. Because he wasn't angry. He wasn't annoyed. If anything, he looked surprised. As though I had interrupted a thought he didn't realize he was having. The silence stretched longer. And longer. Until finally, he spoke. "Are you okay?" I stood frozen, coffee dripping from the front of Ethan Sinclair's suit while what felt like 100 pairs of eyes stared at me. My face burned. My hands shook. Every terrible possibility rushed through my mind at once. I was going to be fired. I was going to lose the best-paying job I had ever found. I was going to disappoint Ben again. The silence felt endless. Then Ethan asked, "Are you okay?" For a second, I thought I had heard him wrong. Not because of his words, but because of the way he said them. Calm. Genuine. Concerned. As if the person who mattered in that moment was not the billionaire standing in an expensive suit. It was the maid who had ruined it. I am so sorry, Mr. Sinclair, I stammered. It was an accident. I will pay for the cleaning. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew how ridiculous they sounded. The cleaning bill alone was probably more than my monthly rent. A few staff members exchanged nervous glances. My supervisor looked ready to faint. Ethan glanced down at the stain for the first time. Then he looked back at me. "You are offering to pay for that?" he asked. I nodded. "It might take me a while." To my surprise, the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Not a smile exactly. More like he was trying not to smile. "I believe you," he said. A few people laughed quietly. Not cruelly. More from relief than anything else. The tension in the room loosened. Ethan handed his phone to an assistant standing nearby. "Please make sure someone helps clean this up." Then he looked at me again. "And make sure she gets a towel before she burns her hands." I blinked. My hands. I looked down and realized hot coffee had splashed across my fingers. I had been so embarrassed I had not even noticed. "Thank you," I whispered. He gave a small nod and continued toward the grand staircase as if nothing unusual had happened. The room slowly returned to life. Conversations resumed. Staff members started moving again. My supervisor hurried over. "Grace, are you all right?" I nodded, still trying to understand what had happened. Why was he worried about me? She stared after Ethan. "That is a very good question." The rest of the shift passed in a blur. I polished silver trays. Folded linen napkins. Carried fresh flowers into guest rooms. But I could not stop replaying the moment in my head. Every time I remembered the way he had looked at me, something felt strange. Not romantic. Not dramatic. Just unfamiliar. Most wealthy people never really saw employees. We were part of the furniture. Helpful when needed. Invisible the rest of the time. But Ethan Sinclair had looked directly at me. As if I mattered. By the time my shift finally ended, the rain had stopped. I boarded a crowded bus heading toward Queens and watched the city lights blur past the window. Two worlds separated by only a few miles. One filled with penthouses and private elevators. The other filled with overdue bills and crowded apartments. I understood my place in that reality. At least I thought I did. Because at that exact moment, several miles away, Ethan Sinclair was sitting alone in his office staring at a security photograph that had been taken earlier that day. And for reasons neither of us understood yet, the photograph was of me. The next morning began the way most mornings did. Too early and not quiet enough. I woke up to the sound of my brother coughing in the room across the hall and immediately checked the clock. 5:32. Outside, the first light of dawn was creeping between the apartment buildings across the street. Inside, our tiny apartment smelled faintly of coffee and laundry detergent. Home. Not perfect. Not impressive. But ours. I found Ben sitting at the kitchen table wearing an oversized sweatshirt and working on a crossword puzzle. His sandy blonde hair was sticking up in every direction. "You are supposed to be sleeping," I told him. "You are supposed to be sleeping too," he replied. I smiled despite myself. Ben had a talent for winning arguments without even trying. An hour later I was back on the bus heading towards Sinclair Manor. The city looked different in the morning. Cleaner somehow. Full of possibility. I spent most of the ride convincing myself that yesterday had been nothing more than a strange moment. A billionaire had shown basic kindness. That was all. By the time I arrived at the estate, I had almost succeeded in believing it. Almost. The morning passed quickly. Guest rooms. Hallways. Fresh linens. The usual routine. Around noon, I was carrying a basket of folded towels through the east wing when raised voices stopped me. Not angry voices. Frustrated ones. I rounded a corner and found Margaret standing beside a housekeeping cart. Margaret was 68 years old, had worked at Sinclair Manor longer than some employees had been alive, and somehow remembered everyone's birthday. She looked close to tears. Across from her stood a young manager named Trevor. "I am telling you for the last time," he said. "The vase did not break itself." "I know that," Margaret replied softly. "But I did not break it." Trevor crossed his arms. "The security report says you were the last one in the room." Margaret lowered her eyes. "Because I cleaned the room." Something about the exchange felt wrong. Margaret was careful to the point of obsession. She polished silver until it reflected like a mirror. She folded towels with military precision. The idea of her damaging a priceless vase seemed impossible. I should have kept walking. People like me were not supposed to get involved. But I thought about the embarrassment I had felt yesterday. The certainty that nobody would believe me if something went wrong. Before I could stop myself, I stepped forward. She did not do it. Both of them turned toward me. Trevor looked annoyed immediately. "Excuse me?" My heart started racing. "I was cleaning the hallway yesterday afternoon," I said. The delivery crew was moving furniture near that room. One of their carts hit the doorway. Trevor frowned. "And you were only mentioning this now?" "Because nobody asked." The silence that followed felt dangerous. Not because anyone was shouting. Because everyone was thinking. Trevor glanced between us before finally exhaling. "I will review the footage." Then he walked away. Margaret stared at me. "You should not have done that." "Why?" I asked. She smiled sadly. "Because kindness is expensive in places like this." I helped her reorganize the cart and continued my shift. What I did not know was that 2 floors above us, Ethan Sinclair had been standing beside a window overlooking the courtyard. And he had witnessed the entire conversation from beginning to end. The next few days passed quietly, but something felt different. Not around the estate. Around me. At first I thought I was imagining it. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was worrying too much about Ben's upcoming medical appointments. Maybe I was still embarrassed about the coffee incident. But every time I turned a corner, I had the strange feeling that someone had noticed I existed. Sinclair Manor had always been a world of routines. Staff came and went. Guests arrived and left. Most people barely remembered the names of the employees who kept everything running. Yet suddenly small things started happening. One morning I discovered someone had replaced the broken wheel on my housekeeping cart. Another day, a supply request I had submitted weeks earlier was approved within hours. Even Margaret noticed. "You have good luck lately," she said while folding fresh sheets. "That makes one of us," I joked. But privately I wondered if she was right. Meanwhile, Ethan Sinclair found himself distracted in a way that made no sense. At least that was what his executive assistant, Daniel, concluded after watching him stare through an entire strategy meeting without hearing half the presentation. Ethan had built billion-dollar companies by understanding people. Investors. Competitors. Consumers. Human behavior was usually predictable. Patterns revealed motives. Motives revealed decisions. But Grace Parker made no sense. The file Daniel placed on his desk should have answered every question. Instead, it created new ones. 24 years old. Lives in Queens. No disciplinary history. Excellent performance reviews. Supports a younger brother with a serious medical condition. Works extra shifts whenever available. No scandals. No complaints. No requests for special treatment. Ethan closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. That is all? He asked. Daniel nodded. That is all. Ethan frowned. Everybody wants something. Apparently not everybody. After Daniel left, Ethan walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the grounds. Rain clouds drifted across the skyline. Far below, employees crossed the courtyard carrying supplies between buildings. Most people reacted differently around wealth. Some became nervous. Some became ambitious. Some became impressed. Grace had done none of those things. She had offered to pay for a suit she could never afford. She had defended a coworker without expecting recognition. She had never once attempted to attract attention. The more he learned about her, the less she fit into the patterns he understood. Downstairs, completely unaware of any of this, I was helping prepare the ballroom for a private charity event scheduled later that week. Crystal glasses lined long tables. White flowers arrived by the truckload. Everything sparkled. Everything felt expensive. Can you believe these people spend more on centerpieces than most families spend on rent? Another employee whispered. I smiled. I try not to think about it. But later that afternoon, while adjusting floral arrangements near one of the grand staircases, I felt a familiar sensation. The feeling of being watched. I glanced up instinctively. Across the second-floor balcony, Ethan Sinclair stood speaking with two executives. He should not have even noticed me from that distance. Yet for a brief second, his eyes met mine. The conversation around him continued. Nobody else seemed aware of anything unusual. But he did not immediately look away. Neither did I. Then one of the executives said something that drew his attention elsewhere, breaking the moment. I returned to arranging flowers, telling myself it meant nothing. Absolutely nothing. What I did not know was that later that evening, Ethan would receive an invitation to one of the most exclusive charity galas in New York. And for the first time in years, the guest list was not what captured his attention. It was the possibility that Grace Parker might be there too. The charity gala arrived on a Friday evening wrapped in golden lights and impossible amounts of money. By 6 o'clock, luxury cars lined the circular driveway outside Sinclair Manor. Men in tailored tuxedos stepped onto the red carpet beside women wearing gowns that looked like they belonged in museums. Cameras flashed. Laughter drifted through the air. Everything sparkled. Everything felt distant from the world I knew. I spent most of the evening carrying trays of champagne and helping coordinate service inside the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead. A string quartet played softly near the stage. The scent of fresh roses filled the room. It was beautiful. And exhausting. Keep smiling, one of the event coordinators whispered as she hurried past. The donors notice everything. I forced a smile and continued working. Across the ballroom, Ethan Sinclair was surrounded by investors, executives, and public figures. He looked perfectly at home among them. Calm. Confident. Effortless. Every few minutes another guest approached to shake his hand. Yet somehow, whenever I glanced in his direction, I had the strange feeling that his attention drifted elsewhere. Toward the staff. Toward the room. Toward anything except the spotlight everyone else seemed desperate to stand beneath. Around 8 o'clock, I approached a table near the center of the ballroom to refill water glasses. 3 wealthy women sat there discussing vacation homes and charity boards. One of them wore a diamond necklace large enough to pay for Ben's surgery several times over. As I reached for an empty glass, she looked directly at me. "You are new, aren't you?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," I replied politely. Her eyes traveled over my uniform. "Interesting." The word sounded less like a compliment and more like an inspection. The women beside her exchanged amused looks. I always find it fascinating, she continued, loud enough for nearby guests to hear, how some people spend their lives serving tables while others spend their lives owning them. A few people laughed softly. My face warmed instantly. The ballroom suddenly felt smaller. Louder. I could have walked away. Maybe I should have. Instead, I placed the water pitcher down carefully and met her gaze. Someone has to make sure the evening runs smoothly, I said. I am happy to help. Another woman smirked. Such a practical answer. It is the truth, I replied. The first woman leaned back in her chair. Tell me, do you ever wish you were sitting on this side of the table? For a moment, I thought about the overdue bills waiting at home. Ben's medications. The second job I would work tomorrow morning. Then I thought about Margaret. About kindness. About dignity. About all the things money could not automatically buy. No, I answered honestly. I would rather earn my place than inherit it. The table fell silent. So did several guests nearby. The woman's smile disappeared. Before she could respond, movement across the ballroom caught my attention. Ethan Sinclair had turned away from the group surrounding him. And for the first time that night, he was walking directly toward our table. The entire ballroom seemed to shift as Ethan Sinclair approached. Conversation softened. Heads turned. People who had spent the evening trying to capture his attention suddenly stepped aside to let him pass. I stood frozen beside the table, my hand still wrapped around the silver water pitcher. The woman across from me recovered first. Her smile returned instantly, polished and practiced. Ethan, she said warmly. We were just having an interesting conversation. Ethan stopped beside the table and glanced briefly at the guests before looking at me. There was nothing dramatic about the gesture. Yet somehow it felt like the only thing anyone noticed. I heard part of it, he said calmly. The woman laughed lightly. Then you know we were only teasing. Was she laughing? Ethan asked. The question landed softly. That somehow made it stronger. Nobody answered. Ethan's attention returned to me. Grace, was the conversation entertaining? Every eye in the room shifted toward me. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. I am fine, Mr. Sinclair, I said carefully. His expression did not change. That was not what I asked. For a second I considered lying. Then I remembered something Ben always said. The truth is easier to remember. Not particularly, I admitted. A few people nearby looked away. The woman at the table straightened in her chair. Surely we are not making an issue out of harmless conversation. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. I agree. Relief appeared on her face. Then he continued. People should be treated with respect without it becoming an issue. The relief disappeared immediately. Silence spread across the table. Ethan rested one hand lightly against the back of an empty chair. This event exists to support educational programs and community services, he said. The entire purpose is helping people. It would be unfortunate if anyone forgot that before dessert. No one responded. No one needed to. The message was clear. The woman forced a smile that looked increasingly uncomfortable. Of course. Ethan gave a polite nod. Then he did something even more surprising. He turned toward me. Thank you for your work tonight. I blinked. Excuse me? The event is running smoothly, he said. That is because people like you are making it happen. The ballroom became impossibly quiet. Wealthy donors. Business leaders. Public officials. All watching a billionaire publicly thank a maid. My face warmed instantly. I am just doing my job. Exactly, Ethan replied. And you are doing it well. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then one of the event coordinators hurried over, clearly sensing the tension. Ethan excused himself and moved on to greet other guests. The room slowly began breathing again. Conversations resumed. Music returned. Glasses clinked. Yet something had changed. Not in the ballroom. In the way people looked at me. Some appeared surprised. Some confused. A few seemed annoyed. As the evening continued, I focused on my work and tried to forget the entire exchange. But forgetting became difficult when several guests suddenly started treating me with a level of courtesy they had ignored earlier. Near midnight, after the final speeches ended and the last donors began leaving, I stepped outside onto a quiet terrace for a moment of fresh air. The city lights stretched endlessly across Manhattan. The night air felt cool against my skin. I closed my eyes for a second. You handled that better than most executives I know. My eyes opened immediately. Ethan Sinclair was standing a few feet away. My first instinct was to apologize. For being there. For taking up space. For existing on a terrace that probably belonged to people like him. Instead, I turned toward the city lights and pretended my heart was not suddenly beating twice as fast. That sounds concerning for your executives, I said. Ethan laughed softly. The sound surprised me. I had seen him speak at conferences and charity events. I had heard interviews. But those public versions always seemed measured. Controlled. This laugh felt real. You may be right, he admitted. Some of them would not have handled it nearly as well. I folded my arms against the cool night air. I did not do anything special. You kept your dignity. His answer came immediately. That is rarer than you think. For a moment neither of us spoke. The music from inside drifted faintly through the glass doors. Somewhere below, a fountain echoed across the gardens. Manhattan glittered in the distance like a field of stars. Can I ask you something? Ethan said. You are the owner. I do not think you need permission. Another small smile appeared. Why did you answer her that way? I knew exactly who he meant. The woman in diamonds. The expensive table. The question about which side of life I wished I belonged to. I looked out over the skyline. Because she assumed everyone wants the same thing. And you do not? I shook my head. I want my brother healthy. I want our rent paid on time. I want enough money to stop checking my bank account before buying groceries. He listened quietly. But I do not spend much time wishing I was somebody else. The wind lifted a strand of hair across my face. I tucked it behind my ear. That sounds strange, coming from someone who cleans houses for a living. You do not clean houses for a living, he said. You support your family for a living. The correction caught me off guard. I glanced at him. You make it sound more impressive than it is. I disagree. Something about the way he said it made me look away first. The conversation should have ended there. It would have been easier if it had. Instead, Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a small envelope. What is that? I asked. A bonus. My stomach tightened immediately. For what? For your work during the event. I did not take it. All staff received one. Then why are you personally handing it to me? The question hung between us. Ethan seemed to consider his answer carefully. Because I wanted to. I stared at the envelope for a long second. Then I stepped back. I cannot accept it. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Why? Because it is not really for my work. Silence. The city lights reflected in the glass behind him. Grace. I appreciate the gesture, I said gently. But I do not want special treatment. The envelope remained in his hand. Most people would not refuse extra money. Most people are probably smarter than I am. To my surprise, Ethan smiled again. A real one this time. Not polite. Not practiced. Genuine. Yet there was something thoughtful in his expression now. As if my answer had raised questions he had never needed to ask before. Then his phone vibrated. The moment broke. He glanced at the screen and exhaled quietly. Unfortunately, reality has found me. I laughed. I thought billionaires were immune to reality. Trust me, he said, slipping the phone away. Reality sends more emails when you are rich. I started toward the door. Good night, Mr. Sinclair. Good night, Grace. I reached for the handle. Then his voice stopped me one last time. For what it is worth, he said, I was not offering charity. I turned back. Ethan's gaze held mine across the terrace. That is exactly why I am worried. The ride home that night felt longer than usual. Ethan's final words stayed with me the entire way across the city. I was not offering charity. That is exactly why I am worried. I stared out the bus window as Manhattan slowly disappeared behind me. The towers. The lights. The world where people like Ethan Sinclair belonged. By the time I reached Queens, I had convinced myself not to think about him anymore. It lasted almost 12 hours. The next afternoon, I was helping Ben organize his medication schedule when someone knocked on our apartment door. We both looked up immediately. We were not expecting anyone. Ben shuffled toward the entrance before I could stop him. I got it, he called. I followed anyway. Old habits. The hallway outside was empty except for a delivery driver holding a large insulated bag. Grace Parker? He asked. Yes. Delivery for you. I frowned. There must be a mistake. He checked his phone. No mistake. The bag contained enough food for a family gathering. Fresh soup. Sandwiches. Fruit. Desserts. Everything from one of the most expensive restaurants in Manhattan. My stomach sank. Who sent this? The driver handed me a small card. No signature. Just 6 words. Please remember to eat lunch today. I closed my eyes. Ben grinned immediately. You have a secret admirer. I have a problem. Same thing sometimes. I spent the next 20 minutes trying to decide what to do. Eventually I called Sinclair Manor and asked to be transferred to Ethan's office. To my surprise, the call connected. Grace. His voice sounded amused before I had even spoken. How did you know it was me? The odds seemed favorable. I looked at the food spread across our tiny kitchen table. You sent enough food to feed an entire basketball team. I may have overestimated. Why? Silence. Then a simple answer. Because yesterday you mentioned groceries. My grip tightened on the phone. That is exactly what I was afraid of. Grace. I do not need saving. His response came immediately. I know. Something about the certainty in his voice made me pause. Then why do this? Because sometimes helping someone is not the same thing as saving them. I looked toward the kitchen. Ben was already eating a cookie and pretending not to listen. You realize this is impossible, right? I asked quietly. What is? You live in a world where sending expensive meals to people feels normal. Ethan laughed softly. Trust me. It does not feel normal. For the first time, I heard genuine exhaustion in his voice. Not stress. Loneliness. The kind that expensive offices and private jets could not solve. You sound tired, I said before I could stop myself. The line grew quiet. That may be the first honest thing anyone has said to me all day. I did not know how to answer that. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then Ethan finally broke the silence. How is your brother? I glanced at Ben. He was smiling now. Really smiling. The kind I had not seen in weeks. Better today, I admitted. Good. Just one word. Yet somehow it felt important. After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen holding the phone long after the screen went dark. Because for the first time I was beginning to realize something dangerous. The more I learned about Ethan Sinclair, the less he resembled the man everyone else thought they knew. The following week settled into a rhythm neither of us seemed willing to acknowledge. We did not become friends. We did not become anything that could be easily explained. Yet somehow Ethan kept appearing in the edges of my days. Sometimes it was a brief conversation in a hallway. Sometimes a question about Ben. Sometimes nothing more than a glance that lingered a second longer than it should have. And somehow those small moments began to matter. One rainy Tuesday evening, I was finishing a late shift when my phone rang. It was the hospital. My stomach tightened immediately. Every family dealing with medical uncertainty learns to fear unexpected calls. I stepped into an empty service corridor and answered. By the time the conversation ended, my hands were shaking. Ben's cardiologist wanted additional testing. Nothing urgent, they assured me. Nothing alarming. But additional testing usually meant additional costs. Additional costs meant additional overtime. Additional overtime meant less sleep and more worry. I sat alone on a storage room bench for nearly 20 minutes staring at the floor. Numbers filled my mind. Bills. Appointments. Insurance paperwork. Problems that never seemed to end. Grace? I looked up. Ethan stood in the doorway. He had removed his suit jacket and loosened his tie. For the first time since meeting him, he looked less like a billionaire and more like a tired man who had worked a 14-hour day. "Are you all right?" he asked. I considered giving the usual answer. "Fine. Everything is fine." Instead, I surprised myself. "Not really." He stepped inside and closed the door quietly behind him. No phone. No assistants. No meetings. Just Ethan. "Ben?" he asked. I nodded. More tests. He sat across from me without saying anything. The silence felt strange at first. Then comforting. "You know what the worst part is?" I asked eventually. "The waiting." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "Waiting for what?" "News. Answers. Good days. Bad days. You spend so much time waiting that eventually you forget how to live in the present." His expression changed. Something distant appeared in his eyes. Recognition. "I know that feeling." I laughed softly. Somehow I doubt billionaires spend much time worrying. Ethan looked down at his hands. "When I was 19, my father lost everything." I blinked. "Everything?" "The business. The house. The savings." His voice remained calm, but quieter now. People only remember the success that came later. They never ask about the years before. I had never seen this version of him. Not the businessman. Not the public figure. Just a man sharing a memory he usually kept hidden. "Were you scared?" I asked. Ethan smiled without humor. "Terrified." The answer surprised me more than anything else. Not because of what he said. Because he admitted it. "I spent years believing money would solve every problem," he continued. "Then I earned more money than I ever imagined." He glanced toward me. "And discovered some fears remain exactly the same." For a moment neither of us spoke. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. Rain tapped against distant windows. Two people from completely different worlds sitting in a storage room discussing things neither of us usually admitted out loud. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Ben. One sentence. "Do not forget milk on the way home." I laughed despite everything. Ethan raised an eyebrow. I handed him the screen. He read the message and smiled. A genuine smile. Important priorities. Apparently. He stood and adjusted his sleeves. "For what it is worth, Grace." "What?" "Your brother is lucky." I swallowed hard. "Why?" Ethan looked at me for a long moment. "Because no matter how worried you are, you never stop showing up." And for reasons I could not explain, those words stayed with me long after he walked away. 3 days later, the first headline appeared. I saw it during my lunch break while standing in line at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the hospital. A television mounted above the counter flashed images from the charity gala. Wealthy donors. Business leaders. Ethan Sinclair shaking hands beneath bright lights. At first I paid no attention. Then a photograph appeared. Me. Standing beside one of the banquet tables. My stomach dropped. The caption beneath it read, "Who is the mystery woman capturing Ethan Sinclair's attention?" I stared at the screen. The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm. Too crowded. Too loud. "You okay?" the cashier asked. I forced a smile and nodded. Inside, panic was already spreading. By the time I returned to Sinclair Manor that afternoon, the story had multiplied. Online articles. Entertainment blogs. Social media accounts. None of them knew anything. That did not stop them from inventing details. Some claimed I was secretly wealthy. Others claimed I was a consultant. One article suggested I was using Ethan for publicity. I almost laughed at that one. If only they had seen my bank account. The atmosphere inside the estate felt different too. Not hostile. Just curious. Employees whispered when they thought I could not hear them. Guests looked at me a little longer than usual. Even Margaret seemed worried. "People get bored," she told me quietly. "When they get bored, they start creating stories." Unfortunately, the stories did not stay outside the estate walls. That evening, Ethan faced a far more serious problem. Sinclair Holdings was preparing for one of the largest mergers in company history. Investors were watching every move he made. Board members monitored headlines with the intensity of air traffic controllers. Public perception mattered. And suddenly, public perception had decided to focus on me. Ethan's mother requested a private meeting. The invitation alone told him it was not really a request. She was waiting in one of the estate's formal sitting rooms when he arrived. Elegant as always. Perfect posture. Perfect composure. "You have become popular lately," she said. Ethan sat across from her. "I own several international companies. Popularity comes with the territory. Do not be difficult." Her tone remained calm. "People are talking. People always talk. This is different." Silence settled between them. Finally she placed a tablet on the table. Headlines filled the screen. Articles. Photos. Speculation. "The board is concerned." Ethan barely glanced at them. "The board should focus on business. Business is exactly what they are focusing on." She folded her hands. "There are expectations." Ethan already knew where the conversation was heading. Victoria Langford. His mother nodded. Victoria was the daughter of another powerful business family. Intelligent. Accomplished. Successful. The kind of woman newspapers described as ideal. The kind of woman investors loved. The engagement announcement would stabilize everything, his mother said. There is no engagement. There should be. Ethan looked toward the windows. Manhattan glowed in the distance beneath the evening sky. And if I disagree? His mother's expression softened slightly. Then you make life harder than it needs to be. Hours later, long after the meeting ended, Ethan stood alone in his office. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass. His phone buzzed with messages from executives, investors, and advisors. He ignored every one of them. Instead, his attention drifted toward a simple photograph resting on his desk. A candid image taken during the charity gala. Not a celebrity. Not an investor. Not a politician. Just Grace Parker carrying a tray through a crowded ballroom with complete focus, completely unaware anyone was watching. Ethan stared at the photograph for a long moment before quietly turning it face down. Because for the first time in years, he was facing a problem that money could not solve. By the end of the week, I made a decision that felt impossible and inevitable at the same time. I resigned. The letter sat on my kitchen table for nearly 2 hours before I finally signed it. Ben read it twice before looking up. "You really think this is necessary?" he asked. I stared at the paper. "The stories are getting worse. People will forget." "Maybe." I folded the letter carefully. "But what if they do not?" Ben leaned back in his chair. "This is about him, isn't it?" I looked away. That was answer enough. The truth was simple. Every article, every rumor, every whispered conversation carried the same message. Ethan Sinclair belonged to one world. I belonged to another. The more attention focused on me, the more pressure landed on him. Investors worried. Executives speculated. Reporters invented stories. And somewhere beneath all of that noise was a man who had shown me kindness when he had absolutely no reason to. I could not become another problem he needed to solve. 2 days later, I arrived at Sinclair Manor earlier than usual. The morning air felt colder than normal. The gardens were quiet. The fountains had not even started running yet. I walked through the front doors carrying my resignation letter in my bag. Every hallway seemed filled with memories. The coffee accident. Conversations in empty corridors. Late nights after events. Moments that had slowly become important without my permission. Margaret found me first. She took one look at my face and knew immediately. "You are leaving." It was not a question. I nodded. Her eyes softened. "Have you told him?" "No, you should. That would make it harder." She smiled sadly. "That is usually how important things work." By noon, the paperwork was complete. Human Resources accepted my resignation without argument. Officially, my final day would be Friday. Unofficially, I already felt gone. What I did not know was that Ethan had spent the entire morning trapped in meetings. Investor calls. Legal reviews. Endless discussions about numbers large enough to change markets. By the time he returned to the estate, the sun was beginning to set. Daniel was waiting outside his office. "There is something you should know." Ethan immediately recognized the expression on his assistant's face. "What happened?" Daniel hesitated. "Grace Parker submitted her resignation." Silence. Complete silence. Ethan stared at him. "When?" "This morning." "Why?" Daniel handed over a copy of the paperwork. Standard language. Personal reasons. Professional gratitude. Nothing useful. Ethan read the page twice. Then a third time. "Where is she?" "She left about an hour ago." Ethan looked toward the windows. The city beyond them was turning gold beneath the setting sun. For the first time in months, the office felt strangely empty. Not because someone important had left. Because someone important to him had. Across town, I stood alone at a bus stop watching traffic crawl through evening streets. My phone remained silent. No calls. No messages. No dramatic final conversation. Maybe that was for the best. Maybe some stories were supposed to end quietly. Then my phone vibrated in my hand. One new message. One sentence. "Grace, where are you?" My thumb hovered over the screen for several seconds before I answered. Part of me wanted to ignore the message. Part of me wanted to protect the distance I had worked so hard to create. Instead, I typed the truth. At a bus stop in Queens. The reply arrived almost immediately. "Stay there." My heart sank. Ethan had never sounded commanding with me before. Direct, yes. Determined, definitely. But this felt different. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. The city moved around me in a blur of headlights and evening traffic. Finally, a black SUV pulled to the curb. The passenger door opened. Ethan stepped out before the driver could move. He was still wearing the same suit from work. His tie was gone. His sleeves were rolled up. He looked exhausted. "You should not be here," I said. "Neither should you." His answer came quickly. "Why did you resign?" I looked away. "You already know why." No, he stepped closer. "I know what you wrote on the paperwork. I want the real answer." The sounds of the city faded into the background. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I finally said what I had been carrying for weeks. "Because everything was becoming about me." Ethan frowned. "It was never about you." I laughed softly. "That is exactly the problem." He looked confused. So I continued. "The headlines. The rumors. The board meetings. Your family. Your investors. Every conversation started because someone noticed me standing too close to you." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "Grace, no," I shook my head. "You built something incredible. Companies. Jobs. Opportunities. Entire industries. I was not going to become another reason people questioned your judgment." Silence followed. The kind that feels heavy. Then Ethan surprised me. "Do you know what my biggest mistake was?" I blinked. "What?" "Thinking I could solve everything by managing it." His eyes never left mine. "The articles. The board. The pressure. I kept trying to control the situation." He exhaled slowly. I never stopped to ask what I actually wanted. My pulse quickened. "And what do you want?" The question escaped before I could stop it. Ethan smiled sadly. "You really do ask dangerous questions." The city lights reflected in his eyes. For the first time since I had met him, there was no billionaire standing in front of me. No public figure. No executive. Just Ethan. "I spent years chasing growth," he said quietly. "More companies. More deals. More success. Every goal led to another goal." He looked down briefly before meeting my gaze again. "Then one day a woman spilled coffee on my suit and started arguing with me every chance she got. I felt my face warm. I do not argue. Grace. Fine. Occasionally." His smile widened. Then it faded. "The point is, you made me pay attention." The words settled between us. Honest. Simple. Real. "I do not know what happens next," Ethan admitted. "I do not know how to solve every problem waiting for us." He took a breath. "But I know I do not want you walking away because other people decided our story for us." I stared at him beneath the glow of a street lamp while traffic flowed endlessly through the city around us. And for the first time, I realized neither of us was running anymore. 6 months later, I stood near the back of the largest conference hall I had ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling screens surrounded the stage. Hundreds of investors filled the room. Financial reporters lined the walls. Television cameras waited beneath bright lights. The annual Sinclair Holdings shareholders meeting had become one of the most anticipated business events in the country. Everyone expected a major announcement. A merger. An acquisition. Another billion-dollar expansion. Nobody expected me. I adjusted the sleeve of my navy dress and tried to steady my breathing. Beside me, Ben grinned. His color had returned. His energy had returned. Most importantly, his health had returned. The additional testing months earlier had led to a treatment plan that changed everything. Life was still imperfect. Bills still arrived. Challenges still appeared. But for the first time in years, the future felt larger than the next medical appointment. Across the room, executives hurried between rows of seats. Investors reviewed documents. Reporters prepared questions. Then the lights dimmed. Conversation stopped instantly. Ethan walked onto the stage. The room erupted into applause. He thanked the audience and began reviewing the company's performance. Growth. Innovation. New opportunities. Numbers large enough to make headlines around the world. Yet something felt different. I knew him well enough now to notice it. He was distracted. Not nervous. Focused. Like a man preparing to say something that mattered more than quarterly earnings. 20 minutes later, he reached the final slide. The room grew quiet. Analysts lifted their pens. Journalists leaned forward. Everyone expected a major corporate announcement. Ethan looked across the audience. Then he smiled. Before we conclude today's meeting, there is one more investment I would like to discuss. Several people exchanged confused glances. Ethan continued. For most of my life, I believed success was measured by growth. More revenue. More assets. More achievements. The giant screens behind him displayed photographs from company milestones over the years. Office openings. Product launches. Awards. And I am proud of what we have built together. He paused. But eventually I learned that some of the most valuable things in life cannot be measured on a balance sheet. The room became completely silent. Ethan's gaze moved toward the back of the hall. Toward me. My heart stopped. The greatest return on investment I have ever experienced came from paying attention to a person I almost overlooked. A few reporters immediately looked around the room. Cameras shifted direction. Ethan smiled slightly. She reminded me that kindness matters. That character matters. That success means very little if you forget how to be human. I felt tears gathering before I could stop them. Beside me, Ben looked suspiciously emotional himself. The truth is simple, Ethan said. She never wanted my money. She never wanted my influence. She never wanted anything except honesty. He extended one hand toward me. Grace, would you come up here? Hundreds of faces turned at once. Every camera followed. For a second I could not move. Then I heard Ben whisper, "You should probably go." Laughter escaped through my tears. I walked toward the stage. Every step felt unreal. When I reached him, Ethan took my hand. Not dramatically. Not for attention. Naturally. As though it was exactly where it belonged. The room watched in complete silence. People spent months telling me what made sense, Ethan said. Who I should be. What I should choose. What would be easier. He looked at me and smiled. Fortunately, the best decisions are not always the easiest ones. Applause started somewhere near the front row. Then another section joined. Then another. Until the entire hall was standing. Not because of a merger. Not because of a business deal. Because two people from different worlds had refused to let other people write their story. As the applause echoed through the hall, I looked out across the crowd and realized something important. Ethan had once owned skyscrapers, companies, and more wealth than most people could imagine. But the thing he valued most could never be purchased. And in the end, that made all the difference.